Warning 6. Fishes that are slowly poisoning older adults. Stop eating them. There was a rhythm. To Sundays, Harold would wake up early. Not because he had to, but because it felt right. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting soft golden strips across the hardwood floor. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sounds of birds chirping outside. And before the rest of the house stirred, Harold was already pulling on his apron, setting out the fish he'd thawed the night before, king mackerel, his favorite. To Harold, it wasn't just food, it was tradition. It was love. On a plate, seared with black pepper and a hint of lemon zest. For years, he'd grilled it every Sunday without fail. Out on the patio, surrounded by rose bushes, his wife Ellen kept trimmed. Like museum art, Harold was the king of the grill. His children would arrive by noon, grandkids trailing behind them like excited shadows. Lawn chairs creaked. Cold drinks clinked. Laughter bounced off the fence. And the fish always. The fish was the centerpiece. Brain food, Harold would say, with a wink, nudging his grandson Luke to finish his last bite. You want to grow up smart, don't you? Everyone believed it. After all, wasn't fish good for the heart, for memory, for growing boys and aging men alike? There was comfort in that belief. Harold was 70, but still sharp. Maybe he moved a little slower, getting out of his recliner. Maybe he had to squint at the crossword puzzle now. But in the backyard, spatula in hand, he felt young, in control, useful. No one questioned the menu. Why would they? It was tradition after all. The smells, the stories, the easy feeling of time standing still. For Harold, Sundays were his way of showing up for his family, and king mackerel was part of that identity, reliable, flavorful, strong. But things, real things, have a way of changing before you even realize they have. It started subtly. He'd feel a bit more tired after dinner. At first, he blamed it on the heat or a restless night. Then one Saturday, while setting up the grill, his hand slipped. Just for a moment, he brushed it off. But Ellen noticed. You all right? She asked, her voice light but her eyes searching. I'm fine, just clumsy, he said with a laugh. But small things kept happening. He forgot where he placed his reading glasses, though they were right in his shirt pocket. He called his granddaughter by the wrong name, once catching himself mid-sentence. His hands, once so steady, with the tongs began to feel unsure. He told no one, didn't want to cause worry. Then came the day he dropped the fish. The grill was hot, the fillets seasoned ready. But as Harold turned to place them down, the tongs slipped right out of his fingers. Not because they were greasy, because he couldn't feel them well enough to hold tight. They clattered to the deck, and for a split second so did Harold's pride. He sat down in the nearest chair, wiped his forehead, said it was just the heat. Ellen brought him water. No one pressed too hard, but the silence said more than words. That night, while washing dishes, Ellen approached him. Maybe it's time we got a checkup, she said gently. Just to be sure. For peace of mind. Harold hesitated. Doctors were for sick people. And he wasn't sick. Just older. But something in her tone, soft, certain, made him nod. All right, he said. Just to be sure. He didn't know it yet, but that choice made over suds and silence would change everything. Because behind the comfort of tradition was something no one had thought to question, something that had quietly built up over years, something that wore no label and gave no warning. And in that moment, Harold crossed an invisible line from normal to uncertain, from confident to cautious. The fish still sizzled, the grill still smoked, the family still gathered. But for the first time in years, Harold felt a flicker of doubt behind his steady hands. And sometimes, that's all it takes for everything to begin shifting. It wasn't the kind of fall you hear about on emergency hotlines. There were no broken hips, no sirens, no blood. Just a quiet moment in the hallway. Mid-morning after breakfast, when Harold reached out to grab the edge of the hallway table for balance and missed. His hand didn't respond the way he thought it would. It moved, yes, but slower, like the signal had taken a wrong turn, somewhere between his brain and his body. He caught himself before he went all the way down, but Ellen heard the thud. She rushed in to find him sitting on the floor. Not hurt, just startled. "I'm okay," he said quickly, brushing off her worry with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Darn socks on this slick floor. But Ellen wasn't fooled and wasn't. That night, she made his favorite soup split pea, thick and warm, and asked gently, "Do you ever feel off, Harold? Like something isn't connecting right?" Harold spooned halfway to his mouth, paused, then slowly set it down. Sometimes he admitted the word landing heavier than he expected. "I've been tired." And the tremors, he looked at his hand. It was still now. But he knew. He'd seen it, felt it, when pouring his coffee that morning. A subtle shake, not enough to spill, but enough to notice. Enough to fear. The following week, Ellen made an appointment. Harold didn't argue. He hated doctor visits, always had. But something in him knew. It was time, not because he felt sick, but because he didn't feel quite himself. And that difference, however slight, scared him more than he was ready to say out loud. The checkup started normally enough. Blood pressure, heart rate, reflexes. But the doctor, a woman named Dr. Cruz, young kind, precise, didn't rush. She asked questions that went deeper than Harold expected. "Have you had any trouble with memory?" Harold, coordination. "Has your family noticed anything different?" He nodded reluctantly. She ordered blood tests, urinalysis, even a heavy metal screen just to rule things out, she said. A week later, they were back in her office. Dr. Cruz sat across from them, elbows on her desk, fingers laced. "Your mercury levels are elevated," she said gently, "quite a bit above what we'd expect for someone your age. Have you been eating any high-mercury fish regularly?" Harold frowned. "Fish? I mean, yeah, king mackerel mostly. Every week for years. I thought it was good for me." She nodded slowly. "That's the thing? It used to be considered a healthy choice, but now we understand more about mercury accumulation. King mackerel is one of the worst offenders." Ellen's eyes widened. "So that's what's been causing the tremors." "The memory slips," Dr. Cruz nodded. "It's very likely contributing. Especially because, as we age, our bodies don't flush toxins as efficiently. Mercury builds up quietly, gradually, and can affect the nervous system, memory, even the heart." Harold felt a strange blend of emotions rise in his chest. Relief, confusion, guilt. All this time, he thought he was doing right by his body, feeding it clean, grilling instead of frying, choosing fish instead of red meat. But beneath the healthy image was a hidden danger, one that came wrapped in good intentions. He stared down at the pale tile floor in the doctor's office. His shoes crossed at the ankle. His hand rested on his knee. For a moment, he noticed the tremor again. Subtle, but there. Not imaginary. Not age real. I was just trying to take care of myself, he said softly, almost to himself. You still can, Dr. Cruz replied. This is manageable. The first step is cutting out the source. We'll recheck your levels in a few months, and we can support your nervous system nutritionally in the meantime. But it wasn't just the numbers that unsettled Harold. It was the realization that something he trusted had turned on him, and no one, no label, no commercial, no health magazine had ever warned him. When they got home, Ellen pulled the mackerel out of the freezer. Harold watched her toss it in the trash. The thunk it made, hitting the bottom of the bin, sounded like an apology, or maybe a promise. That night, the backyard was quiet. No grill smoke, no laughter, no ritual. Just Harold in his armchair. Ellen beside him, a game show murmuring softly in the background. He stared at the flicker of the television without really watching. I feel stupid, he said finally. Ellen reached over and took his hand. You're not. You were doing what everyone told us was healthy. You were trying to be strong for all of us. He nodded, blinking back something warm in the corner of his eye. But maybe he said quietly, it's time to learn a little more before I light that grill again. Outside, the wind rustled the patio umbrella. And somewhere inside, a new kind of awareness took root. Not fear, not shame, but the beginning of a shift from tradition to intention, from habit to healing. The grill stayed cold for weeks. It sat untouched in the corner of the patio, a thin layer of dust beginning to gather on the lid. The same lid Harold had lifted hundreds of times, rain or shine, holiday or Sunday, now closed like a book he wasn't ready to reopen. He stopped sitting out there altogether. Said the sun was too bright, that the wind had picked up lately. But the truth was simpler. He couldn't face it, couldn't face the space where he'd once stood, proudly tongs in hand, serving up what he believed was health on a plate. Now, it felt like a stage where he'd been the fool, the king of a meal that slowly betrayed him. Every day felt a little smaller, a little grayer. Ellen began to notice subtle changes. Harold took longer to get dressed in the morning. He left lights on in rooms he wasn't in. He skipped lunch. Some days, said he just wasn't hungry, and he hadn't cracked a single joke at breakfast in over a week. But what concerned her most wasn't the silence. It was the way he moved, like someone trying not to take up space. One afternoon, their son Mike stopped by with the grandkids, the youngest Zoe. Only 5 ran straight into the kitchen where Harold sat nursing a cup of tea. Grandpa, we brought fish sticks, she beamed. He froze. Ellen gently intercepted the conversation, guiding Zoe back outside with a promise of popsicles. Mike followed her with a questioning look, but she only shook her head and mouthed later. When the door closed, Harold looked at the box sitting on the counter. It wasn't mackerel, probably tilapia or cod, but he felt sick anyway. His stomach churned, not from the food, but from the guilt. How many years had he served fish to his family, thinking it was the healthy choice? How many plates had he filled with something that might have been hurting more than helping? That night, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Ellen was asleep beside him, breathing softly. The dog curled at her feet. But Harold couldn't sleep, couldn't quiet the voice inside that whispered, "You failed them. You failed yourself." He thought about canceling his next follow-up appointment. What was the point? The damage had already been done. He felt like a burden now, a body carrying bad decisions. And worse, he didn't know what to trust anymore, not even food. The next morning, he didn't join Ellen at the table. She found him sitting alone in the garage, flipping through an old fishing magazine from the 90s. His hands trembled just slightly as he turned the pages. His eyes glazed, not really reading. "I was proud of knowing what was good," he said, without looking up. "I read every health article, listened to every show, grilled instead of fried, always fish, never steak. And I thought I was protecting myself. I really did." Ellen sat down beside him. "I know." He closed the magazine and stared ahead at the wall where his old fly rod still hung. A layer of dust had settled there too. "But now, I don't even know what to eat. I feel like I need a manual for my own body." Ellen rested her hand over his. "Maybe we write a new one together." Harold didn't answer right away, but the way his shoulders softened said something had landed. Later that day, Mike called. He'd been doing some research, looking into what fish were safest for older adults. He sent Harold a link to an article. 6 Fish seniors should avoid and what to eat. Instead, Harold read it quietly at the kitchen table, glasses low on his nose. The words were familiar: king mackerel, tilefish, swordfish, ahi tuna, farmed salmon, imported, catfish, each name like a notch of regret. But beneath each warning came something else, an alternative: wild-caught salmon, sardines, canned light tuna cod, haddock, rainbow trout, U.S. farmed catfish. It wasn't a list of don'ts. It was a second chance. That night, Harold didn't sleep through the whole night, but he didn't stay up drowning in guilt either. He started thinking, really thinking about how to shift, about what it would mean to turn this mistake into momentum. The next morning, he made a grocery list. He still didn't feel like himself. The tremors came and went. His energy lagged. But something new flickered in him. Not quite hope, but direction. And that he realized was enough to start. When Ellen walked into the kitchen and saw the list on the counter, her breath caught. It didn't say king mackerel. It didn't say grill tools. It just said wild salmon sardines, lemon dill, fresh bread. One more try? Ellen smiled. They weren't healed, but they weren't stuck anymore. Harold stood behind her, still in his robe, but upright, awake and aware. "You think the grandkids would eat sardines?" he asked with a half smile. "Only if you tell them it makes them superheroes," Ellen laughed. "Then I guess I better learn to fly again first," he said. And just like that, something shifted again, not loudly, but deeply. It didn't begin with a speech or a grand gesture. Just a quiet Tuesday, the kind of morning that slips by, unnoticed. The mail arriving late, birds scattering from the feeder, coffee slightly burnt, But something was different. Harold stood by the kitchen window, longer than usual, watching Ellen tend to her basil plant on the porch. She wasn't aware of it, but she hummed when she gardened soft and off-key, the way she had for decades. He used to tease her about it, but today he listened. And then he moved. Not out of obligation, not because someone told him to, but because something inside stirred. That old voice, buried beneath guilt and fatigue, had whispered, "Try again." Harold reached for his old notepad. He flipped through the pages past grocery lists and scribbled grandkid birthdays and stopped on a blank sheet. He began writing out a simple plan, not for a diet or a recovery timeline, just clarity, foods I trust, questions to ask, things I want to understand. He didn't know exactly what this was, but it felt like control, like the first rung on a ladder back to himself. That afternoon, he and Ellen drove to a small health market across town. It wasn't their usual store, too far for a weekly trip, but it had a good reputation, and Harold felt safer starting somewhere unfamiliar, no memories tied to the fish counter here. They walked slowly through the aisles. He asked the butcher, "Where's this salmon from?" The answer wild-caught. Alaskan made him nod with quiet relief. They picked up fresh dill lemons and a small jar of imported mustard. A younger couple passed them in the aisle, and Harold overheard the man say, "My dad still eats swordfish every Friday. Says it's tradition." Harold didn't interrupt, but inside he made a note. At home he stood in the kitchen, not as long as he used to, but long enough. He opened the package of salmon, rinsed it under cool water, and patted it dry. Ellen watched from the doorway, half holding her breath. He wasn't grilling. Not yet, but he was cooking. A pan, a squeeze of lemon, a few pinches of salt. The sizzle was soft, not as grand as the backyard flames. But in that sound lived a beginning. He plated the fish with slices of avocado and 2 pieces of toast. No big audience. No backyard crowd. Just him and Ellen sitting across from one another. Elbows resting gently on the table they'd shared for 40 years. "Smells better than it used to." She smiled. "Tastes safer," he said. They both laughed, not loudly, but genuinely. And for the first time in weeks, Harold ate without flinching, without fear, hiding behind every bite. That evening, he opened the article Mike had sent again. 6 fish seniors should avoid. But this time, he read it like a guide, not a warning. Every section reminded him of a moment, his fall at the grill, the way his hand had shaken holding a fork, the exhaustion that followed even light meals. But instead of shame, he felt recognition. This wasn't just his story. It was hundreds, maybe thousands of stories. People like him. Families like his. And maybe, just maybe, he could help someone else see it sooner. Harold turned to Ellen. "What if we shared this with your church group?" She looked up, surprised. "You mean like a talk?" "No, just a conversation. About what we didn't know. What we wish someone had told us sooner." Ellen reached for his hand. "That might help more people than you think." The following Sunday, they sat in a small circle in the church rec room. Nothing formal, just 6 couples and 2 widows who brought banana bread and questions. Harold didn't lecture. He just told his story. The grilling, the symptoms, the checkup, the mercury, the silence around foods we assume are good. simply because they've always been on our plates. People leaned in, nodded. One woman admitted she still fed her husband imported catfish twice a week. Another said her brother swore by Big Eye tuna sushi no one had known. Not really. By the end, they weren't just swapping recipes. They were swapping awareness. And as Harold walked out that day, one of the men stopped him. "Thanks," he said. "You just changed how I feed my wife." That night, back home, Harold pulled out the grill cover. He didn't uncover it yet, not fully, but he wiped it down. The dust, the cobwebs, the things that had built up while he was retreating, they came off easy, easier than expected. He wasn't trying to be who he was before. That Harold was gone in some ways, but in others, he was coming back just a little different, a little wiser. Ellen stepped outside and stood beside him, arms folded against the chill. "Thinking about salmon?" she asked. "Maybe next week," he said. "Maybe something new." She smiled, and they stood there a moment longer, the evening sky opening above them, wide and clear, like a chapter waiting to be written. It was early, too early for most. The house was still touched only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of trees outside the window. Harold sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in the sweater Ellen had knit for him last Christmas, the one he used to forget he even owned. A cup of chamomile steamed at his elbow, untouched. His reading glasses rested at the tip of his nose, and in front of him lay a piece of paper. Blank, clean, waiting. He had woken with the idea before the sun even broke. A letter. Not to his son. Not to his grandchildren. Not to Ellen. But to himself. Because somewhere along the way, in all the noise about health and food and fear and getting older, he realized he had lost the thread of his own voice, the one that used to be steady and sure, the one that grilled confidently every Sunday, the one that remembered names and told stories without needing to pause for breath. That voice had gone quiet for a while, but not today. Harold lifted his pen and began, "Dear me, you didn't know. You couldn't have known. All those years, flipping fish on the grill, believing you were doing it right, because you were told fish is good, that it makes the mind sharper, the heart stronger, the body leaner. You weren't wrong to believe that. But you didn't know the difference between what was good and what was dangerous. You didn't know that mercury builds slowly, that even clean-looking food can carry hidden harm, that the same plate that once brought your family joy could quietly take away your energy, your steadiness, your clarity. But now you do. Now you understand that aging doesn't just mean slowing down. It means waking up to things that were always there, just unseen. And now that you see, you can choose smarter, softer, stronger. This isn't a letter of regret. You did your best with what you had. But this is your reminder. There's still more ahead. There's still mornings like this. Still days to walk into with awareness. Still meals to share. Still people to protect, starting with you. You were never weak, just uninformed. But now you are both older and wiser. Take care of this body. It's carried your memories, your laughter, your heartbreak. It's earned your gentleness. And when you stand by that grill, again, when the grandkids run through the yard, and Ellen smiles at you from the porch, remember this moment, this paper, this promise to never assume, to always ask, to always care. Love, Harold. He paused at the signature, not because he doubted the words, but because signing your own name to a truth like that, it carries weight, not like shame, but like ownership. The kitchen light grew warmer as the morning wore on. Ellen shuffled in her robe, trailing like a shadow, hair wild from sleep. She kissed his forehead, eyes soft with habit. "What are you writing?" "A letter," he said to myself. She smiled as if she understood, without needing to ask more. Later that day, Harold folded the letter and placed it in a small envelope. He slid it into the drawer where he kept his grilling tools, not to hide it, but to keep it near the place where the misunderstanding had begun. It belonged there, like a note pinned to the past, ensuring it would never repeat without reflection. Weeks passed, then months. Harold became the label reader in the family. He started carrying a little card in his wallet, listing the 6 fish to avoid. He emailed it to friends. He brought it to the community center. He even posted it on the bulletin board at his barber shop with a handwritten note for your parents or for yourself, because food remembers even when we forget. But the biggest change was quieter than all of that. It was in the way he held his coffee without tremors again, in the way he remembered his granddaughter's school play date without prompting, in the way he stood in front of the grill, again this time with wild-caught salmon, a squeeze of real lemon, and a confidence no longer based on assumption but on truth. The food changed. The habits changed. But so did Harold. He no longer feared his body. He respected it. He no longer shrugged off symptoms. He listened. He no longer called it just aging. He called it awareness. One Sunday, as the family gathered once more under the late afternoon sun, his son Mike approached him by the grill. "Hey, Dad," he said, "thanks." Harold turned, wiping his hands on a towel. "For what?" "For teaching us. For not pretending everything was fine when it wasn't." Harold smiled and nodded. "Took me long enough," he said. "But we got here." That night, after the grill cooled, after the kids were tucked in and the stories were told, Harold returned to his drawer and reread the letter. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a beginning. And as he placed it back gently, he whispered, almost like a prayer, "Stay sharp, old man. They still need you." And with that, Harold turned off the kitchen light, walked into the evening stillness, and sat beside Ellen under the stars, grateful not just to be alive, but to still be learning how